Good evening, town. Hey, everybody. My name is Andy. I'm blessed to be an alcoholic and blessed to be with you all tonight. God, I pray to seek to love, comfort, and understand, and to contemplate the miracle of your grace having brought me up and out of the abyss. I pray today that I will remember that you, dear God, let me carry along with the abyss the key to liberation from it. The key is simply focusing my behavior on serving you and my fellows rather than obsessing on myself, to care for myself in the service of others. Amen. Look at God. That's from Don Major, the Kentucky Fried Prayer. Don from Louisville passed away a few days ago, I believe, and he left us a lot. And it's important to carry his message, our message, forever and ever. Wow. Thank you, Alice, for the invitation, and Brenda. I love you, and it's been just incredible, just in the short amount of time that we've got to know each other. And isn't it true? These threads of recovery, that have formed in this program of love that we have, that have deepened on the Zoom platform, way beyond anything we ever could have imagined. It's an honor and a privilege, but ultimately a responsibility to give back to Alcoholics Anonymous. AA saved my life. No two ways about it. I can never give back to AA, but I could try one day at a time. Was taught here that I show my gratitude through the buckets of tears that get shed in these rooms, and I'm going to do my best to. I'm not going to keep the crying to a minimum. I'm just going to try to cry through it and talk through it, and that's what it is, right? To just be real. I get to be real today. And I'm going to get to that page in a minute, but I just want to say a few particulars. My sobriety date's October 21st, 2005. That's when God separated me from alcohol, came between me and a drink on that moment. It wasn't, any particular special day. I had nothing to do with it. I remember, what it was. I had 2 warm shots of Jägermeister. You all remember Jägermeister, right? That warm. Well, it wasn't warm for a long time. It was frozen for me, but at the end, it was just warm. And it was a Friday night. My wife Susan, who I'm still with today, we're almost married 39 years. She walked out in total disgust. And but that's the day. That's the day that I believe God just said, "You've had enough." I had a 30-year run. There was some good times, but I didn't get here because, I had a few, bad weekends. I had a few bad decades. With some good times sprinkled in. And I'm here to just say first and foremost, welcome. Welcome to anybody that's new or struggling, having a tough time today, whether you got one day or 30 years. I was reminded when I came up to a guy by the name of Bud P. In a group that I used to go to, the Stumbling Forward group in Butler, New Jersey. And Bud P, had 60 years and he passed away sober. And he said things like, it's life and death one day at a time, because I came up to him all impressed that he was celebrating maybe like 45 years. And he said, if you didn't drink today, you tied the record. No one's done it any better. And you people taught me that. You people taught me that. I do want to say something to anybody that's new and struggling too, that, it's okay. You're here with us. We got you. And, don't take it from the words I'm saying, take it from the big book. The big book talks about on page 124 that we need to cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. That's on page 124. There's a man on this call that, has some pizza boxes in the background. It's a guy I love and admire tremendously. And he taught me the word enthusiasm, right? And I'm a bright guy. When I got here, I had a lot of degrees, and my sponsors said, thermometers have degrees, where they put them, right? Jerry wasn't impressed with me. But this man here that's on this call defined the word enthusiasm. EN stands for inside. THU stands for God, and ism is a belief system, right? So enthusiasm today for me is about clearly my belief in God and the miracles that come from being here and being present, right? AA is a miracle program. And I'm going to talk about the miracles because, when I get to this one paragraph in a minute or two about meditation, how did I get to that page? How did I get to that page that says, we usually conclude the period of meditation. It was a long journey. It was a long journey to get there, when I came to you, I was completely broken, lost, in poverty, not external poverty, but poverty inside. I was homeless, not externally, but inside. And the way, if you looked at my life, you'd look at it like this. It was like a swan, right? I was like a swan just gliding through the air, looking all, beautiful and graceful, landing on a pond, but underneath the swan's paddling like hell. And that was me for a long time, I don't want to spend too much time on my story unless it comes out of these pages. But needless to say, when I got to you, the worldly clamors, the inside, the unmanageability that we talk about in the second part of the first step, that was getting louder, louder, and louder. And thank God you had an answer for me, right? And in the end, I'm most grateful for the pain that brought me to you so you could bring me to God. That's what it is today. That's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm nothing unique. Whatever I'm going to say is nothing unique. In New Jersey, we say things like terminal uniqueness, which means that if I think I'm unique, I'm terminal. It's not true. It's not true. So again, anybody that's having a rough day today, I'm here to tell you that the answers are here. The treasure map is in this book. The catalyst for an awakening is in this book with a sponsor and asking God to join, and another man or another woman. And here's the journey, right? I want to talk about, the third and fourth dimension, because to me, I spent a lot of time, most of my life, in this third dimension, right? What's the third dimension looks like? It's a dimension, of materialism. It's a dimension of what my life was like, trying to, trying to get over on everybody, to trying to, manipulate everybody, to lie, cheat, and steal, to get what I wanted. My life was about, getting what I wanted. And if you looked at me, might have thought I was a nice guy, but I wasn't. I had a nickname in college. It was ADB. It stood for Andy Douchebag. And I'm told that I'm less of a douchebag today. And I like that. You people tell me that. You judge me, as I am today. And it's different. It's really different. So talking about this page, right? We usually conclude the period of meditation. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous in 2005 on October 21st, and sat around for a while and marinated. I marinated because I needed to thaw out. I was completely frozen. I got here because I got caught. I got here because I ran out of lies. It wasn't as if my whole life blew up from the outside in. I was this close, right? I was this close. I contemplated suicide, and I found out that really, as a real alcoholic, I was committing suicide one drink at a time. But I didn't know that, I had a 30-year run again, and I'm a child of the 70s. So there were a lot of substances there, everything except spike in a vein pretty much, but it was always about drinking, And I came into Alcoholics Anonymous because I got caught, and I got thrown out of rehab because I couldn't give a clean urine. And suddenly I'm deposited, crawled into the rooms in New Jersey, the Westwood Morning After group, in northern New Jersey. And there's also another group, the Park Ridge group. And see, I came into the spirit of the fellowship. And I love that this meeting is the fellowship of the spirit. I didn't see, there is a solution that the words get shifted, right? The spirit of the fellowship to the fellowship of the spirit. I came into the fellowship of the spirit. The spirit of the fellowship, rather. Spirit of the fellowship, where you put a warm blanket around me and said everything's going to be okay. And you said, welcome home, and things like, you're never going to have to feel that way again. And I sat and I marinated, and I, didn't do a step or anything like that. And it ended up that, as some people talk about in meetings in Los Angeles, I was in step 0, going round and round, thinking that there were more than 2 options, right? The 2 options were die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis, but I needed to burn through this fuse. And suddenly, after a period of about six months, in which, I was on another jumping off place, right? This other jumping off place where we talk about the jumping off place of, I can't live with alcohol, I can't live without it. And I would know the loneliness that few would know, but I had another jumping off place. See, I couldn't live with AA and I couldn't live without AA because the steps hadn't infiltrated my life just yet. And eventually, in a revelation in which, God convicted me of the truth that I was one of you, that I was powerless over alcohol in 2 ways, the physical side of it. When I take a drink, the drink takes me, that allergy, the phenomena we call craving, and the obsession to alcohol, the mental illness, which in the end, I didn't want to look at. I didn't want to look at the fact that, when I wasn't drinking, my mind would take me back to a drink. And if ever there was a need for God, there it is. I need God between me and the thought of the first drink so I can live in a recovered state. A recovered state, not cured, but in a recovered state. I didn't know that at the time, And then eventually it came to me that, well, that dash that goes to unmanageability didn't talk about the unmanageability on the outside. See, I never, ever wanted to look, on the inside, because I didn't have DUIs. I didn't have jail time. I wasn't incarcerated. Everybody was Irish Catholic from the Bronx with 6 or 7 brothers and sisters, and I'm a Jewish kid from Brooklyn whose mothers had 4 husbands. There are no Jewish alcoholics, Why am I in the church basement, right? And eventually that burnt out, and I saw that I was convicted of the truth that I was one of you, and that began my journey. And I'm skipping along, starting the steps, right, for the first time around. And then I come to the question of meditation, right? And at least in New Jersey, at the time, my seeking of meditation did not really come up with much. In fact, when it was brought up in meetings, people kind of said, yeah, I try it, but, my mind won't shut up, the chattering of 1,000 monkeys, go to another place to do that. We don't really do that here. That was just my experience, But then I heard a tape. I heard a tape by Bob D out of Vegas. And Bob D, who we all know, a lot of us do, maybe some of us know him real well, talked about what meditation meant in the big book, right? He said that it's about meditating a war, something like that, where you separate out the things that are working for you. If you're going to go to battle, the horses that are still capable of, carrying armaments, right? And the ones that don't. And that's how you, decide, by contemplating your thought life, right? And it's great because the dash between the thought and life that's on page 86 connects the 2 ideas, just like the 2 ideas in the first step, right? It's not Mad Libs, it is connected for a reason. And it means that, my life to a large degree is governed by my thinking. It doesn't just happen, right? So that meditation, which then got defined for me, by backing up and looking at page 86, it talks about when we retire at night. It talks about on awakening. Now, I don't see it says I need to sit on a zofu and cross my legs. I don't need to have a guru. I don't need to burn sage. I don't need to quiet my mind, right? I don't need to turn the lights down, close my eyes. I don't need to go to a sweat lodge. I don't need to go to a silent retreat, though I have gone to them, and that's been great, right? Because my concept was all about the Eastern practices, That's how I was, you talk about old ideas, right? We talk about, I hate to use the word prejudice because it sounds so strong, but I had old ideas about what meditation meant, And I sat and I was able to, maybe quiet my mind and breathe a bit and all that. And then after I heard that tape by Bob D, I went back and I looked and I said, well, just like the instructions for prayer here, the instructions for meditating are here, right? Contemplating my thought life, sitting back and focusing on, in the end, what God would have me do. And I get all these great instructions, right? All these great instructions. On page 86, before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking. Well, wait a minute. That's the third thing. See, it says first, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. But wait a minute. I'm supposed to do the third thing first. I'm supposed to ask God to direct my thinking first. And then I get to, think about the 24 hours ahead. It's written in kind of a funny way, right? I mean, it took me quite a while to see that, wait a minute, what's up with that? And it's written a lot, the third thing first. And it generally is in the book about having, God there. But wait a minute, we're going to give you a little instruction first, and then we're going to come back to that, right? Yeah. How great is that? And you know what, with the reality that now, I get to contemplate my thought life and to actually, in the end, wait for instructions. Boy, is that freeing. Is that freeing? Now, there's times when I can do that, with my eyes open, and to breathe and to cross my legs and sit on a zofu. But I don't have to. Throughout the day. And it really does talk about throughout the day to do this. It doesn't say that I need a special time. So when it came to me, and then, I discussed with my sponsor, Jerry said, that's right. You've been meditating already. I said, Jerry, why didn't you tell me that? He said, I didn't want to rob you of the journey. And I said, I said something under my breath, he says, I know. I said, that was painful to get to the point of doing that, right? Get to the point of that. And what I've seen is, for me, the obsession, the mental illness, that my mind would take me back to a drink. No matter what's gone on in my mind, good or bad, is this fatal obsession that needs to be kept at bay, right? Needs to be kept at bay. I'm not going to outgrow that ever. Just like I'm not going to outgrow the allergy, right? I am not, if I continue the way I'm going, I believe that, I'm going to die an alcoholic. That allergy will continue to grow, but because of following the strict spiritual disciplines of 10, 11, and 12, that race will be won, with God consciousness. That's what I believe, And my ability to practice this meditation, going through when I retire at night, going through on awakening, which doesn't necessarily mean when I first wake up in the morning. On awakening could mean when I first actually are present in that moment, right? There's moments when I get up and, my mind is not in the moment, right? It's everywhere but here. So the awakening, being conscious of where my feet are may take a little time. But I know today that my ability to practice these strict spiritual disciplines are dependent on the first 9 steps, right? I didn't just get into the 4th dimension by coming up, and putting my toe in the water and just walking in the water. I was catapulted, It's a slingshot. I was hurled into that place. And the whole point of the first 9 steps is to get me into 10, 11, and 12 so I could be useful to others, right? My sponsor said to me, he said, my job as a sponsor is to help you meet the conditions to enter the world of the spirit. And when you enter the world of the spirit, God can heal this broken world through you in the 4th dimension. 4th dimension living, What does the 4th dimension look like? I'm going to read some things, that are just amazing. What's it like living in the 4th dimension? A loss of interest in judging oneself. Frequent attacks of smiling. Yeah, right. A loss of the ability to worry. Gaining the ability to love without expecting anything. That's the awakening, right? But the primary thing for me was the awakening was that I found out what was wrong with me, right? All these years, the best I could come up with was what's wrong with me. And what alcohol did, when it seemed to work, this artificial way to a spiritual experience at age 15, when I had that first drink and I went from the outside of the circle to the inside, I was able to dance better, look better, all of that. Talk to girls, talk to guys. I found out that the electrifying experience I chased for so long. I chased it through all the New York City clubs, all the New Jersey bars, went to London, went everywhere. I chased that, It's something. There's a place called the Ritz in the East Village, also known as Webster Hall. They keep changing names back and forth, but I went there when I was like 19. At age 40, I'm standing at the edge of the dance floor, looking around and saying, is this all there is? So I went back to the bar, at age 40 with 2 kids, a wife at home, a good job, and I'm still trying to get back to that moment when I was completed, when I was treated. And what I found out was that the great effect that alcohol had for me was to bring me into the moment and allow life to be acceptable in that moment when it did work. Even if it was an illusion, it definitely kept me from blowing my brains out, right? So in the end, there's a law, I believe, a spiritual law, that the depth of what alcohol gave me in the beginning was the depth of what it was going to take away at the end, as I went along to this abyss of my own wretchedness, right, in the end, and couldn't stand it anymore. Yeah. But this obsession, I have to come back to the obsession because some of us are probably aware of the wonderful letters between Carl Jung and Bill Wilson, especially the one that went to Bill Wilson from Carl Jung in 1961, before Carl Jung, I believe, passed. And what Carl Jung said was simply this, that, alcoholism is a search for wholeness or union for God. And he said this law, spiritus contra spiritum, right? That the spirit of the universe, God, would be greater than alcohol, even though our book talks about alcohol as a king, right? It was my king, it was my savior for a long time. And isn't it true that, for me, for us, awakening to the fact that the only thing that will stop me from thinking about that first drink is God between me and that first drink, that power. It's greater than King Alcohol. Some of us may remember the series The Wire, right? Why would I bring up the series The Wire? Well, it was a great character. Omar Little, who died, Michael K. Williams, died a few years ago. And he said, if you're going to go after the king, you best not miss. And AA doesn't miss. AA doesn't miss. This meditation, though, what goes on to contemplate my thought life, right? I know today that if I wake up in the morning and my first thought is not about me, I'm off to a good start. I'm generally waking up, meaning my eyes are open, or I'm starting to, the wheel's starting to turn, and I'm in prayer today. It could be the 3rd-step prayer, the 7th-step prayer. It could be for others that are ill right now. Some of you may know that my sister-in-law, Barbara, has been battling cancer for quite a while now, and she's had multiple setbacks, and I get to be by her side. I get to be there to love and comfort her. That's another miracle. So that she's been on my mind tremendously, and I know there's been folks, around the world that have also been helping with that. The miracles that come now, right, come in the thoughts that come. The thoughts that come today, after being around a while, are the miracle thoughts. I was told, AA, don't leave until the miracle happens, and don't live when the miracle happens. And the miracles of my life, the unexpected, moments of grace that come, are there just for observation today. and participation. Some of you may know, our first grandchild, granddaughter was born, a few weeks ago. She's a month old. Her name is Camilla with one L. I get to help build a crib, I get to be part of her life, to be dependent on. That's Alcoholics Anonymous, that's God. And the funny part about it is, my daughter-in-law is she's a little nervous, about everything, So we went ahead and took a infant CPR course in New York City before the baby was born. And wouldn't you know it, 2 doors down from the infant CPR, was the Club Danceteria, which was a monster club for me back in the days in the early 80s. And I'm looking at him going, wait, 37th Street. Yeah, it's right there. It's funny how God brings things around full circle, after all these years. The miracles to me are not perfection either, because I'd be not honest with you if I told you that the thought life is always just beautiful, right? It's not. But I'm directed to a rule, I'm directed to another law that if I'm thinking about God first, if I somehow turn my thoughts, it's kind of like, you can take the words out of the 10th step, right? Where we turn our thoughts, right? Very spiritual word, turn, we ask God. But if I turn my thoughts to God and away from whatever else, that's the path. That's the path. And I need a barometer, right? One of my barometers is quite simply, if I spend as much time with my kids as I do with God, would my kids feel loved? If I spend as much time with my kids as I do with God, would my kids feel loved? And that straightens me right out. Because for me, if I'm not thinking about my kids, something is off. But then that pulls me right to the idea of, wait a minute, God's waiting, God's very patient, and I need to get there, immediately. To get there immediately. So the beauty of this period of meditation is there are no rules, right? I mean, the instructions are here, right? Clear-cut instructions are here, but it can be fashioned into what works, right? What works for me is having this proper attitude. If I back up a little bit onto the page before that, right? If the 10th step didn't catch my attitude, being wrong, what's the proper attitude, right? It's an attitude of love, of kindness, of compassion, of joy, of principle, of patience. I had none of that. I had none of that for so long, I couldn't wait to get what I wanted, right? To get what I wanted now. And I would do everything and anything, and I would lie, cheat, and steal to get it. I was a champion liar. And, when I think about what I looked like when I got here, I go back to a movie that, it's an Oscar Wilde book or short story, called The Picture of Dorian Gray. And I say that with a heavy heart because it's not easy to watch. And it's been remade many times, but the one that got me was made a long time ago in 1945. And basically, it's the story of a Victorian gentleman who's, really good looking. He's with, many different women. He's a, kind of a man of society. And he gets older. But prior to him getting older, he has a portrait made, right? And the portrait gets put away in the attic. And people see Dorian Gray, as he gets older, and they tell him, well, you're 45 years old, but you look like you're 20. How is that possible? And then Dorian Gray goes and looks at that painting, and that painting is abominable. That portrait of him when he was, 22 and good looking is a picture of him inside. Is a picture of his decaying soul. And it's not an easy watch. But for me, that was me. That was me for so long. And I couldn't live with myself anymore. And now I go from, as Bruce Springsteen said, it's a sad man who's living in his own skin and can't stand the company, right? To what Pharrell Williams said in the song Happy, my life is like a room without a roof. A cappella to a symphony, right? But I needed to be crushed. I needed everything in me to be crushed. It's been said by some that God can't use a man until he comes to the end of his self. I didn't want to look. I never wanted to look. And, all that stuff that went on in childhood that I came to you with, the domestic violence, the forefathers, or, they were married to my mother, but they were not fathers in a sense that I could, really think about, had nothing to do with it, Sure, they made me thirsty when I picked up at age 15, I couldn't wait for something. But they didn't make me an alcoholic. I just happened to come into this world separate, apart, and different, And okay, okay. That's my story, right? That's my story. So in thinking about the day, we may face indecision. Here we ask God for inspiration, intuitive thought, or decision. We relax and take it easy. Relax and take it easy. How about that? To just sit back and wait. Progress, not perfection, right? To just wait. God's given me all these different instructions, but I'm asking him for a few things too. The great reality inside me, right? It's inside me. It gets transmitted through you to me, but it's always been inside me. Just like in The Wizard of Oz, right? When Dorothy clicks her heels at the end, and the good witch Glenda says, you've always had the power. I had a consistent GPS problem, right? That GPS problem meant that I lived in resentment in the past and fear in the future. All fears in the future. There's no exceptions. But you taught me to stay in the moment. So I have 8 F's of God right here. We don't struggle. What used to be a hunch or an occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. I was a product of the streets, but I'm a product of Alcoholics Anonymous today. My journey's been it's been rich, it's been abundant. Some people call us the Confederation of the Humbled, and I like that, right? To actually know my place in the world today, and to have the instructions to actually, know what God wants me to do. And that's to engage in other alcoholic and spiritual activity so I can live a useful life today. To go to bed at night, knowing that I may have some difficult relationships now, difficult moments with people, but I can hit my head, concerned, but not as affected as I used to be. I wouldn't say concerned and unaffected, but I'd say concerned and not as affected as I used to be. And these relationships, because this meditation, this process of going through when I retire at night, having the right attitude, connecting my thought life, on awakening, considering my plans, but asking God first, that's affected all my relationships. The steps in the end are about being at home with self, being connected to a community, and being protected by God. I had no real relationships until I came to you. I just didn't, I mean, I did believe that I was constitutionally incapable of being honest, just like that, in how it works. It was haunting to me for a long time, And you said things like, A is going to shake the truth out of you. The truth will set you free, but it's going to make you miserable. All these things. But little did I know, and I was taught this as a kid, honesty is the best policy, but I never did it. And I got to you, and you made it possible to see that I could finally be honest. I could finally be honest. Thank you. And these relationships now that I have, my wife and I, are thinking about our 40th wedding anniversary. It's not this year. It's another year, but we're talking about it now. There's an intimacy that's grown little by slowly, as Sister Maurice used to say. Some of you may remember Sister Maurice. She would say little by slowly. And there's an intimacy that's finally, after a lot of years, come into our marriage. My kids are 30 and 33, and they're honest, open, loving, beautiful, beautiful relationships with them. I can be a friend today. I never was a friend. My life was about, getting over on you. And today it's about, well, what do you need? Most of the time, like I said, I'm not perfect, but the best part of this is that, when I got here, the relationships that I had were all broken, but there were still people around me that seemed to love me, right? But I was a taker all my life. Buy me, bring me, give me. And I needed to be a receiver of your love before I could be a giver. A receiver of your love before I could be a giver. And now it's what do I need to do? How can I help? How can I help? And the love that now exists is overwhelming at times. Overwhelming at times. And I just needed to be crushed and see that you had a way. So just to finish up, I mean, Bill Wilson wrote, "The age of miracles is upon us. Our own recovery proves that." I'm not unique. My journey, has been, well, maybe the best way to put it is, there's this great parable, dismount your donkey at the summit. And it talks about how we all get on different donkeys, and some move slowly, some move quickly. Some people enjoy the journey, some people hate the journey. But when they get to the summit, the donkeys are laid to rest. They're no longer needed. And we all see from the same vistas. And isn't that true of all of us? Game of Thrones had a great line in it. For those that knew Game of Thrones, great series. A lot of brutality. I mean, every other day another character was having their head chopped off, but who cares? But one thing that was said was, everything you did brought you to where you are today, where you belong, home. So I'm going to end with that and say thank you to this group, to Alice, to Brenda, to everyone. There's a bunch of folks on here that I've gotten to know over the last 3 years. Hope to meet all of you in person someday, but if not, well, Zoom's not bad. Zoom works pretty well, and for all of this. And thank you. I'm going to end with that. Love you all.